This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Gwilda Wiyaka's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the Science of Magic or endorsed in any manner by Gwilda Wiyaka, Relmar McConnell Media Company, its affiliated networks, stations, or employees. Welcome to the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, a program dedicated to uncovering the unified nature of reality and humanity's ever-evolving place as truly galactic beings. For more information on the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Hello once again, dear friends, and welcome to the Science of Magic, where we combine the science and magic of today's leading topics to co-create new solutions. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour we'll be exploring ancestral knowledge. The great spiritual dilemma of our time is the question, who has the right to participate in earth-based practices? There's much talk of ceremonial appropriation in First Nations. Is our right to connect with the earth as individuals dependent upon whose ancestors dominated and whose were overrun, skin color, and which piece of global real estate we happen to be born on? Who really are the First Nations? The Neanderthals were present long before those we currently view as indigenous people. What were their practices? We don't want to step on any toes here. Yet there is an unfortunate modern practice of appropriating indigenous ceremony without permission or proper training, as evidenced by self-help guru James Arthur Ray, promising to help people achieve both spiritual and financial wealth for an exorbitant price. Ray held an improperly conducted sweat lodge ceremony in an erroneously constructed lodge that ended in 3 dead and 19 hospitalized. Increasingly, people from all nations hunger to reconnect with the earth, and rightfully so. If we don't return to the circle of life and the balance to be found there, it would appear our days are numbered. Unfortunately, many of us have been disconnected for so long, we can't tell the difference between information coming from the earth and that from our triggering, patterns, and ego. We desperately need tried and true ceremonial methods with reliable checks and balances to assure clear information and alignment. There has been and continues to be horrendous injustice and abomination perpetrated upon indigenous peoples worldwide. From slavery to genocide, human history is steeped in cruelty and discrimination. The ancestral damage runs deep with seemingly no solutions in sight. Yet, no one owns the wind. And if we don't stop peeing on the lodgepole, transcend our differences, and realign with life, our continuation as a species is definitely in question. With us to delve into this controversial dilemma is Pegi Eyers, author of Ancient Spirit Rising, Reclaiming Your Roots and Restoring Earth Community. Pegi's work is a survey on the interface between First Nations and the settler societies and the vital recovery of our ancestral, earth-connected knowledge. Her website, StoneCirclePress.com. Pegi, thanks so much for joining us on the Science of Magic.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
What's your background training that prepared you to write this book?
Well, I live in a part of the country. I live in Canada and Ontario, and there's a lot of First Nations in our vicinity, so I've been very blessed to have that proximity over the years. I live near Trent University. There's a large Indigenous studies program there. And the starting point, I think, for my book was hearing First Nations people talking about the cultural appropriation that was happening in my own area and in other parts of the Americas. So I started to see that syndrome more clearly. It was happening in the New Age world around me, in the self-empowerment, transformational industry, and in so many other places. So I started to pay more attention to that, and then my book came out of that observation, and then my book went off into so many other directions. But cultural appropriation was definitely the starting point.
Would you mind, for our listeners, what exactly is cultural appropriation?
Well, I think to really simplify it, a good guideline, you can look at the culture you belong to, and then you can look at the culture that's being appropriated from. And if they're on an uneven if one of those societies is oppressing the other, then it turns into cultural appropriation. If both of those cultures are kind of like on an even playing field, shall we say, then it would probably just be a case of cultural sharing. But here in the Americas, there's definitely a dominant society. It's called...
Well, we're going to have to go deeper into this subject on the other side of a commercial break. Yeah. So Peggy and I will return shortly. Don't you go away. This could get good. You're listening to The Science of Magic. Our current episodes are aired daily on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. In service to our listeners, prior innovative episodes can always be accessed free of charge on our website, thescienceofmagic.net. The Science of Magic is proud to be produced by Relmar McConnell Media Company, Hamilton, Ontario, Canada.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Pegi Eyers, author of Ancient Spirit Rising, Reclaiming Your Roots and Restoring Earth Community. Her website, stonecirclepress.com. Peggy, we were just starting in the process of defining cultural appropriation when we had to take a break. Would you mind going back into that for me?
Yes, I was saying that every person in the Americas who comes from a European background, we're new to this continent, to the Americas. We belong to the dominant society. So even though we weren't around at the time that our ancestors arrived here, we are still part of that dominant group that, we were the settler colonials, so to speak. So the people that were oppressed on Turtle Island were the Indigenous people. So there's a definite separation between a dominant society and a subordinate society. So there is no cultural exchange, any kind of use of that Indigenous people's spiritual or cultural property would come under cultural appropriation because it's an extension of settler colonialism. First, our ancestors came here, they took over the land, then the resources, and in the final step of genocide directed toward First Nations, the whole agenda would be to assume the identity of the First Nations people. So it isn't a harmless, even less harmless than we think it is, right?
So you're
James Earl Ray, that is like the furthest extension of colonialism when you can actually assume a Native identity. Well, actually, he didn't assume a Native identity. I'm sorry, he just had the sweat lodge ceremony. But people like Lynn Andrews, there's a whole string of people that actually assumed First Nations identity, even though they're not First Nations. So that's the furthest on the continuum of cultural appropriation, and that is the most harmful.
Well, but is it cultural appropriation for the natives to practice Christianity?
No, because it's not possible to do reverse cultural appropriation because that's just called adapting to a dominant society. They're in a subordinate position. No matter what they do, they're still oppressed people, right? They're still in the minority.
So is this based on our lineage? Is this, as people currently present alive, is whether we're culturally appropriating or not based on our lineage?
No, it's based on the fact that we belong to a white dominant society.
Okay, well, I got a schizophrenic problem here. You're going to have to help me with. Okay, I'm part Cherokee, part Lakota, and part Irish. Should I just shoot myself now? What?
That's a fantastic combination. So definitely to claim those First Nations parts of your heritage, and that puts you in a totally different framework, shall we say. So it's not possible to appropriate from your own culture. I guess in your situation, what the challenge is to find communities that are willing to accept people that haven't been there from the beginning. This is what I hear from a lot of people that have different backgrounds are finding out about. You just can't walk into a Cherokee or Lakota community and say, "Oh, hi, I'm
redheaded. That's not going to work real well."
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a challenge, but it's all about community at that level, but you still can't deny your own heritage.
It's very confusing for a lot of people today, I believe, because there's a lot of really well-meaning people that have a mixed heritage. They don't even know what it is. Who really knows who our daddy was, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And the time is demanding that we return to our roots, not just our roots, but the Earth's roots, so that we can find balance. How do we rectify this dilemma?
Yeah, and it comes from such a good place, and people's hearts are in the right place, and we do need to turn to Indigenous knowledge. And it is, definitely the way that, we're going to go forward as a human race. I love that whole idea of going back at the same time as you're going forward, and how I named my book Ancient Spirit Rising. So there's just so many elements that we can bring into our lives today. We are modern people, but there are so many ways to incorporate different ways of thinking, different ways of living, and it's a really exciting movement. It's kind of still in its infancy. And what I would say is to find those elements from your genuine background, and then you don't have to be involved with cultural appropriation in any way. I'm a Scottish Gael by heritage. I'm just learning about my own culture because I'm 8th generation Canadian, but, the trail is pretty cold at this point, but I do, there are a lot of markers for me to go back and reclaim that heritage. So that's really exciting, is this ancestral work. We don't have to appropriate from anybody.
Well, here's another interesting question is, we don't know who the original peoples were, right? If you go back far enough, we all had the same mommy and we all had the same daddy, and I don't know how it got so messed up. I don't think any of us really know. But didn't the information originally come from the earth? Because I know, as I work shamanically, and I don't appropriate anybody's ceremonies, I work from the things that they all have in common. And you'll find that in my Celtic heritage. You'll find it in my Native American heritage. There's certain things that all shamanic practices, and that's different than Native spirituality. Okay, all shamanic practices had in common. There's a shamanic root at the base of every nationality. Okay, and there's so much in common that it had to have come from the same place. And my suspect is that same place is the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are reconnecting with the earth to get the information we need to move forward,
Mm-hmm.
and it looks like something that somebody's done before, how does that keep us out of hot water?
Yes, well, I think it comes down to having that ethical code or, some kind of moral compass. If we're so in love with Indigenous spiritualities, and then we hear from the Indigenous people that are living all around us that they're offended, that they're hurt, that they're upset, that this is, they're struggling just to reclaim their small sense of self-identity because it was so stripped away from them, being raised in a residential school, being adopted into a white family. So all of the white people that are kind of into this, at the same time that First Nations, who are the practitioners of a lot of this knowledge, just here on Turtle Island, I'm only talking about Turtle Island. So it is a real interference, and it is, we have to understand how offensive, some of these practices are to our First Nations brothers and sisters. And do we really want to create more harm? Do we really want to, continue the colonial process? So it comes down to personal ethics, I believe.
Would you mind describing clearly, so we got people out there listening. They're going, gee, I don't want to do that. But what does that look like? What are we taking? What are we stealing? What are we doing? Where's the line?
Yeah, so I think that you can be informed by nature. I practice animism. I take my cues from the natural world. I am interacting with nature spirits, and this is my work, and I do it every single day. But I don't use the cultural markers of the people, that came before.
What are those?
Before.
What are those markers?
I'm sorry?
What are those cultural markers?
Oh, there are cultural markers or things like, the sweat lodge. That's not something in my own tradition. Smudging with the abalone shell and, the smudge mixture. That's not in my own tradition. So there's a lot of things that we just take for granted, like the talking stick. That is not in my own tradition. So, you take a really good look at some of these things like dream catchers and so on. They are not from our own traditions, really. And I know you're talking about this universality, but there are tremendous differences as well. And this diversity usually forms the groundwork or the roots of that particular Indigenous society. And they do have a right to actually claim ownership on some of these practices and these spiritual objects, and they can say they actually belong to us. The Hai to have their own distinct ceremonies and cultural practices. So I hear what you're saying about universality, but at the same time, I do think that the traditions are extremely different.
Yeah, actually, I don't come from a universality place. There's this scientifically proven, or at least mathematically proven, theory that says that the present is created equal parts from the past and the future.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we see the hurts and the wounds of the past. Mm-hmm. How can we reach to the future to find a third option? Because this squabbling is getting ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I certainly see where it's hurtful to first tell them they can't have their own practice. I mean, I have ancestors that were in the orphanages and treated with DDT. Right. I've got that kind of heritage in there. And yes. To first be almost murdered, it was clear in the 70s you weren't even allowed to practice your own religion. And now having the New Age people go off half-cocked.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. That's why I wrote my book.
Exactly. So tell me, how are we going to get an earth-based connection without appropriation?
Yes, well, I think, that two-row wampum or this model is wonderful. It came out of the Haudenosaunee tradition, and it's and the Anishinaabe, and it's the two canoes going downstream, and the one culture is sovereign in the one canoe, and the other culture is, self-sufficient in their canoe. They're going down the same river, but they're respecting each other, and neither one is trying to get in the other's canoe. Wonderful metaphor, and I think if we can, as white people, we really need to work hard to reclaim our own ancestral identity. I think that's the key to everything here. If we can really get solidified in our own identity, then a lot of these problems wouldn't be happening. It's just that as white people, we're so used to jumping all over the place, and consumerism has really fed into that. oh, today I can go get a book on Reiki, or next week I'm going to go and study the ancient Peruvian crystal skulls, and we just jump, from one thing to another constantly. But if you could just settle down and sort of, pick a particular heritage, or, if we have many, say we're from like 4 or 5 different European countries, you have to actually settle on one, and then just sort of delve into our own ancestry. And I think that's how we're going to become, strong in our own cultural roots and our own connection to the earth. And we will also gain the respect of other First Nations people as we're doing that.
Peggy, that's
such a circle of indigeneity. We're not being kept out of the circle of Indigenous knowledge. We just have to come into it, a little more stronger in our own tradition, and then we'd be welcome at that sacred fire. Seriously.
So beautifully put, because the dabbling is what's causing the problem, is people just taking a little from here, a little from there, and there's no grounding to it, and it can be very damaging and misrepresenting. Yeah.
And I think New Agers, they sort of end up mistaking that materialism for the spiritual path itself, and it isn't a spiritual path. A spiritual path is something that takes, a lifetime to perfect, and you would spend maybe 30 years just on one thing, whether it be tarot cards or, whatever it happens to be. You really have to spend a lot of time perfecting it. So,
yeah, it seems like that's kind of where we took a left turn, is mistaking the practice for the goal.
Exactly. Yeah, I see that a lot, don't we?
Well, yeah, we've so lost sight of what's really, really possible if you really commit yourself to a practice, like you say, and the closer it is to your original practice, the better. That we're wired that way.
Exactly. That's totally what my whole book's about. So.
Fantastic.
You're brilliant.
Well, no, that would be you.
Yeah, no, you hit it though.
Well, we're
going to have this orphan syndrome too, as white people.
We're going to have to take
our heritage, and it's just so easy to find. It's right at our fingertips.
Peggy, we're going to have to take a quick break here. Peggy and I will return to our discussion on the other side of this break, so don't go away. We're coming to you through the X-Zone Broadcast Network. Don't miss the other fine shows and hosts on xzbn.net. You're listening to The Science of Magic, your resource for creative solutions in a changing world, thescienceofmagic.net.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Pegi Eyers, author of Ancient Spirit Rising, Reclaiming Your Roots and Restoring Earth Community. Her website, StoneCirclePress.com. Pegi, what do you see as the result of our losing our Earth connection in the first place?
Oh, that's quite a large question. I think that it's been happening since the rise of Christianity 2,000 years ago. I think the idea of Christianity was that the human being became the top of this great chain of beings. So we were like the only being on the planet that had, great intellectual abilities and so on and so forth. And I think it came up to the modern times, that same ideology through science. So instead of Indigenous people who feel that they are part of the interconnected web, they're neither above this great chain of being nor below it. They're part of it. So that interconnected reality makes the human more of a nurturer of, and respect. We respect nature, and ceremony is part of our role. to ensure that continuation of nature. But we've lived in a society for the last 2,000 years that's completely the reverse. So you have human beings dominating the natural world, dominating each other, and then with the rise of racial or race theory, which created racism, that gave people sort of the empowerment to enslave people of color, and also to, what happened in the Americas with the genocide of the Indigenous people. So they're two completely, people say there's similarities between the Western mind and what I call Indigenous mind, but it's really, really, really different. There's not a lot of commonalities between the two.
So, how can we hope to return to nature-based ways with our shrinking habitat? It's full of cities and technologies. We really, what's the solution there?
I think that there's not like one solution, but there's a whole range of movements for addressing the problem. The permaculture movement, transition towns, sustainability, all these things, part of elements of getting back to an earth-connected society. So there are so many wonderful things happening right now. We just have to hope that it trickles more into, the mainstream society, people that are in love with their fancy cars and having these capitalist enterprises and sort of, being in love with the whole idea of empire. There's quite a difference between people that have sort of become awake and aware to, this system isn't really working anymore. We can't really be doing that anymore. Capital has sort of, there is an end point. It can't go forever. So the economic model is quite flawed because it's based on the idea that resources are infinite, whereas there is, an end point. So there's so many, delusional ideas that have created the society we live in, and yet, many of us are actually, we're waking up. There's just this huge groundswell of people that are starting to see the alternative. So there's a lot of hope right now.
I think there is too. I mean, we're seeing all sorts of just ingenious things. I live off grid, and the gentleman that put in my solar for me, he said, "Well, if you find you need more electricity, don't get more batteries, get more solar panels. They're guaranteed for 25 years. That's how long they last." It's like, boy, have we come a long way,
That's great.
And there's the tiny homes. There's all sorts of things that are really moving us back, even though there's a lot of us, to a way that's a little more user friendly. You mentioned essential eco-selves. What do you mean by that?
Oh, I think it's that whole process of reclaiming your own Indigenous self, that earth-connected self. And there's, a wide range of our behaviors that we can sort of look at more critically. And this is how we can emulate the values of Indigenous people. This is what is quite interesting. It's not cultural appropriation, but we can certainly learn from Indigenous people and the values that they hold. The 7 grandfather teachings in the Anishinaabe tradition are, kindness, gentleness, other qualities of the human being, the good qualities that make us, good people. Those are kind of like values that we can all learn from. And just that constant, reversing back, it's like a course correction every day. You're thinking, okay, do I go off and do something that is going to be complicit with this system I don't believe in, or am I going to, take an alternative route? And, we're up against that every day. As more and more people make these choices, it will turn out to be a groundswell in the end. That's what we're hoping anyway.
We're certainly open for that, because the alternatives aren't real pretty, are they?
Exactly. Before climate change really kicks in. So
am I hearing you say, again, it's almost like splitting hairs, that it's okay to look at the teachings and learn from the teachings, just not appropriate the ceremony of our Indigenous people?
Well, absolutely. And to claim identity, that is the absolute, most reprehensible part of cultural appropriation, is to go around, you've created a native name for yourself. Maybe you're calling yourself Blaireau, or you've seen the whole range of them, right? So then you've created a native identity, and then you're offering ceremony to other people and charging, money for these ceremonies. That's the furthest on the continuum. Using smudge in your own home or wearing moccasins, that's really not cultural appropriation. You're assisting native artisans by buying their products. And we're being urged by First Nations to learn about their cultures too. I mean, we can't just not know. The more we learn about the people that live around us, the Haudenosaunee or the Anishinaabe, the more we learn about their cultures. The better equipped we are to be good neighbors, to come together in a peaceful coexistence. So we do have to learn a tremendous amount about First Nations, but just, don't assume that Native identity, and do not use their cultural signifiers in your own practice, and, do not really feel free to use the ceremonies and rituals as you would offer that to other people in workshops and, charge $3,000. So those are the boundary, there are boundary lines that weren't in place before. And the more people learn about it, then the boundary lines can sort of be put back in place.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense to me. So what recommendation do you have for, your Caucasian people that are really trying to find their roots? They're not sure what they are. Where do we find them?
Yes, I think that whole area right now is so exciting. I call it the ancestral arts movement. And, find out your own genealogy first. There's so many ways. And there's never been a time before in human history where we weren't surrounded by so many sources of information with the internet, incredible libraries, and these new genealogy companies are springing up. And it's not expensive now to find out your exact DNA. It's very useful for so many people that come from diaspora or, forced immigration. They don't even know who their ancestors are. Both my grandparents were British home children. They came to Canada through, a scheme. It was coming to light more and more that it was more like a child slavery program than anything. But because of industrialization in Britain, there were so many children living on the streets. The poverty was so rampant, and right at the tail end of the Victorian era, they decided to, Canada was being settled, so they decided to get this program into place that shipped enormous numbers of young children to Canada without their parents. So
do you suggest
really questionable about all that? So those are my ancestors, right? And I really don't know really who they were related to because they came here sort of as orphans.
So do you suggest like blood tests or ancestry.com or
absolutely,
So we go out and we get a blood test, and we go out and get a blood test, and some of them take you so far back. How do you even find the ancestry? Oh, well, you were Mongolian way back when, or even earlier than that. So is there a kind that you suggest that'll give you a little more detailed information where we still have a chance of accessing the practices of our ancestors?
Yes, it's really exciting. I mean, the Ancestry.com and the Ancestry123, they don't go back far enough. They give you the choice of matrilineal DNA or the father line. There's different DNAs. But the one company that takes you back in time, I had my DNA sent in. It's really quite expensive, but I think it's really well worth it because they take your cultural group, they match it with the archaeology that's been done all over the planet. So they match your DNA with the migration of different peoples, and it's from the Seven Daughters of Eve, the book, that wonderful book that came out by Brian Sykes. And then he formed a company called Oxford Ancestors, and that's how I had my DNA tested, and it placed me in a cultural group going back 36,000 years.
Oh, good grief! Well, how do you find the practices?
So these are my, Neolithic ancestors, so you can't get any more indigenous than that.
Right, but how do you find what practices they had? And that's a ways back
then you turn to the historical record, and mythology and archaeology offers us so much information. So you have to really do quite a bit of study, and people are doing it. There's so much information right now.
Yeah, well, you remember the old game of telephone where a line of people line up and they'd whisper in each other's ear and pass down a phrase?
Oh, right,
and 5 or 6 people later, they'd say what the phrase was and compare it to the first one that started it, and the meaning had totally changed.
Oh,
so
right.
if that's you see it all the time. So if that's the case, and I know how important oral tradition is, but once we go down that many thousands of years, hasn't the ancestral wisdom been polluted and misinterpreted as it's been handed down? And how do we deal with that?
Yeah, I think that does just become such a long extension of time, doesn't it? I think that's where our own ancestral memories come into play, which I truly believe in, that we hold things, deep inside us, in our, at the cellular level even. So if we have a dream or, visions, there's ways to encourage that work and to meet with ancestors in dreams and visions. This is such an exciting area to delve into. Also, your imagination. Sometimes we have to recreate different cultural practices, and with that attitude of sacredness toward the earth and bringing in the local ecosystem where you happen to live now, I don't think that you're going to be faulted. No one is going to ever say you cannot access your own heritage. So it's quite exciting. So it's a combination of sort of ancestral memory, dream work, and imagination. You're going to have to recreate, quite a bit of it, I think.
Well, how about moving forward? How about we find the principles that all of the practices used and use them to create new traditions?
Yes, I think that is going to be something that will happen. And, let's face it, we have lost so much that you said splitting hairs earlier. I think you're so absolutely right. It's going to come to the point where, things are going to have to come together, and it's going to have to be, an acceptable practice, and it's going to be done in a good way. And I think, we're just going to have to accept that. Like, without, getting all political about it, at some point we're just going to have to sort of put the politics aside. Time is short here, people.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we're going to have to take another commercial break. So Peggy and I will be back shortly, so don't leave us now. This is The Science of Magic, your resource to altruistic professionals of science and the esoteric, working to create common ground for the betterment of our world. Join our email family to receive our amazing topic-driven episode collections at thescienceofmagic.net, and don't miss the other shows on xzbn.net. There's some new exciting ones, so tune in and listen.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, bringing together gifted people of service to the world. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. What's up in your world? Email me at info@thescienceofmagic.net and suggest a topic or a guest that's on your mind. You're probably not the only one that would enjoy listening to it. Our guest this hour is Pegi Eyers, author of Ancient Spirit Rising, Reclaiming Your Roots and Restoring Earth Community. Her website, stonecirclepress.com. Pegi, you speak of the recovery of our authentic ancestral wisdom, and yet we're talking about whales. We may or may not be able to find that this far down the road. So what exactly do you mean by our authentic ancestral wisdom?
Oh, I just think simply that means that it is something in your own heritage. And I know that's really complicated. It's quite a challenge for us as European-derived people because, there can be so many different combinations. My DNA turned out to be just one particular Celtic group. And, you just have to have your DNA tested, I think, and go from there.
So once we do that, and we were talking about the difficulty of sometimes the practices have been lost. And you were saying there are ways to use our imagination to reconnect. How is that valid? How does that work?
Well, I mean, that is going way, way back, to a time when there wasn't even nation states in Europe. But there's always been a thread of paganism throughout our European history. And these revival movements are really, really, strong today. There's Nordic paganism. There's the Celtic Reconstruction movement. There is, traditions that are for people in countries like Poland and so on. I can provide links to all of these amazing, new cultural revival movements that are happening. And we do have Celtic Reconstruction here in the Americas. We have Nordic paganism. And it's just a matter of learning where these groups are located. With the internet, there's so much going on Facebook and so on. There's a wealth of information now available. All kinds of books have been published in Druidry. If your tradition is more like the Avalon tradition in, Welsh and English traditions. So there's just a wealth of information. And really, there is no excuse really right now for not learning about your own wisdom traditions, because there is just so much information. You can hardly not, go into this exciting movement. There's just so much going on.
And you know what it brings to me is this piece of authenticity. And there was in a lot of different teachings I've run across how each of us were cast to the four corners of the world. And when we plead, if any of us doesn't stand in our authenticity and hold our piece of the information, and isn't that part of what's going on now, is being able to bring our piece back rather than try to take on someone else's.
Yes, and I know it's really, really challenging work because, we've been so disconnected from a specific ethnocultural group. And even as white people, we don't even see the need for ethnicity anymore. We think that our heritage is something called Canada or, the USA, but those are not really true cultures. They're actually great big nation states, So this is how challenging and so difficult this work can actually be. But I think in the years to come, we're going to see a lot more of small bioregional developments, like the small village model, and sort of people coming together in intentional communities. I really see that as a wonderful movement, and if they're aligned with a specific ethnicity, that's good, but if they're not, that's probably good too. So there's all kinds of different ways to do this work.
Yes, we definitely have to move forward and quit squabbling about backwards. So you speak of a paradigm shift. Would you go into that a little for us?
Yes, I think that the whole rejection of how we see that capitalism and all the destruction of the earth is really reaching a real all-time dangerous point. So sort of shifting back and moving away from that precipice, I call it, that we've reached this really, really dangerous point in human history. So the paradigm shift, is basically coming from, so many different movements. Wasn't there a book that came out and said there was something like, 1 million just organizations in the U.S. alone that are based on, sustainability? So I see so many things as being part of the paradigm shift. You can see it everywhere these days. We just have to, reach the critical mass, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't take that many, from what I understand, if you think about the 100th monkey theory.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about that. If that was absolutely true, I think things may have happened already. So I'm a little bit iffy about that theory, but in certain principles, it does work, yes.
So what is the decolonization process you've been talking about in your book?
Yes, and I think earlier, before the break, I touched on our role, kind of like, I think in the future, a good thing to really look at, too, is we do have to combine, a political or social justice activism with our spiritual path. I think this is extremely important to be doing right now, to get involved with the political process. We're kind of stuck with it. This is the system that we're living in. So, to get involved with that, to do, protest work, whether we're marching in the streets or working for anti-racism. I've come to the point where I see all those things as incredibly spiritual. So I think we really have to sort of shift our thinking into what is it we can actually do to support the liberation of, other people. It goes all the way, through the intersectional oppressions to, even speciesism, which is the liberation of, animals and earth community, which has also been oppressed. So, there's just so much work we can be doing right now in social justice. And I don't see that as inseparable from a spiritual path. I think the two are really, really, connected. And I just wanted to sort of throw that in there. I don't think I answered your question, but I just wanted to say that's really important.
So, your work is very all-encompassing, like you say. It went a lot of different directions. Where did you get the education? What's the background you came from to be able to write it?
I know when the book got going, it was like one thing led to another and led to another, and it was just, my own scholarship. I've been a writer and a reader all these years. I call myself a deprofessionalized learner because I have no real, academic credentials. I probably, should have gone through higher education, got a PhD. I'm kind of glad in a way that I don't have a lot of academic credentials because it gives me a lot more freedom. So people I see that are like stuck with a PhD in a certain thing, they sort of have to stay in that, particular knowledge stream. And I'm just a free spirit. I just sort of jump all over the place.
But then, that being the case, how can you be confident in what you're sharing if you don't have the background?
Oh, it's thoroughly researched. Like, my book has been accepted at the local university here. Like, it's just through good research. My book is completely nonfiction. There's a couple of poems in the book. So it's a heavily researched book of contemporary social justice theory. Everything is right up to date in the book. There's 620 footnotes, and it's all a complete synthesis of movements, academic theory, everything that's like happening out there. I touched on most of those movements are itemized in my book. Plus my own thinking, of course, is what a scholar does. You have to, add in your own analysis. So there's quite a lot of that as well.
Were there libraries that you researched, found this stuff at? It's not easy to find.
Oh my gosh, yes, it took 3 years to write this book. It was sent to the university library. I did a lot of research online. The bibliography at the back of the book is 40 pages.
Wow, yeah.
So that is like gigantic, and that's kind of like the librarian in me coming out.
Yeah. So you're are you a librarian?
My inner librarian.
Oh, your inner librarian. Got it.
And it's been reviewed by people with PhDs, and they'd find absolutely no fault with the book. So, you don't have to have a credential these days to write a good researched, piece of literature. You can do it without the credentials, believe me.
So
I encourage everyone, don't worry about having a credential or not. Just go and start writing.
So what do you do when in your real life? Do you have a profession?
I'm just promoting my book right now. That's my full-time, and I was a visual artist prior to that and a curator. I sort of flipped from being a full-time creative person to being a full-time writer. This just happened in the last 8 years or so.
Well, we got a little bit of time left, and I'd kind of like, going forward, what about personal responsibility of the individual? We can all go wham, wham, wham. Your people did this to my people and blah, blah, blah. But what about personal responsibility and moving forward? How about we get over it and move forward already? What's to stop that?
Well, I really think that it isn't up to us as non-Native people to, set the tone for how First Nations are going to go through their own healing. If it takes them 30 years or it takes them another 100 years, those are the people that were affected by settler colonialism that came from our own, background. That is what we have to struggle with. I'm not saying we need to be guilty about it. Guilt only implies you actually, did something. we weren't there at the time when our ancestors came here and, did all these horrible things. But I do think today we have to have that responsibility. I think it's our generation that somehow has to, make amends for this damage. And I think we really have to pay attention to First Nations. We have to work in allyship to make sure that.
Well, I'm sorry,
human
but
rights are honored, and so
it's hard to
really
it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe we're out of time, but we are. Peggy, thanks so much for coming on the show. Our guest this hour has been Pegi Eyers, author of Ancient Spirit Rising, Reclaiming Your Roots and Restoring Earth Community. Her website, stonecirclepress.com. This has been The Science of Magic. Join our email family to be the first to receive our thought-provoking, topic-driven episode collections at thescienceofmagic.net. Until next time, dear ones, may you be blessed with knowledge and comforted with love as you uncover your ancestral knowledge.